This is Guardian Radio, your station for up-to-the-minute news, intelligent, interactive, and engaging conversation. 96.9 FM. The views and opinions of the hosts and guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect the position of the management and staff of Guardian Network.
Good morning and welcome to Guardian Radio AM. Today is Friday, June 24th, and it's a little after 11 a.m. in the morning. And once again, this is C.A. Nuri, and I shall be your host for today as we again speak to and continue a conversation with Duelita Datas. Ms. Datas is a community organizer from Ottawa, Alberta, Canada, who manages a non-profit organization called Ubuntu. Ubuntu is a Swahili word, South African word, meaning I am because we are. It's a theory of collective responsibility. Within Duelita's organization, she concentrates upon assisting marginalized and vulnerable groups who are oftentimes forgotten about, left to inadequately fend for themselves. So we had a conversation on Monday, and I invited Duelita Datas, I remember that I do call her Datas, to continue that conversation because I think it's a conversation that can be brought to the Bahamas. How do we assist a marginalized group? For those listeners who weren't here last week or Monday, for a fact, Duelita belongs to the Haitian Bahamian community. She has recently migrated to Canada where she resides and lives, and she has started a organization that is making waves, that is helping people, intimately people. And I wanted to have a conversation on how that similar organizations can be established here in the Bahamas, and also to talk about the responsibilities of the particular vulnerable group, marginalized group that she once upon a time belonged to. So I'd like to welcome Datas. Datas, are you there?
Friday.
Excellent, and thanks very much for joining me once again. I appreciate it. And like what my introduction said, I know you have an organization that helps marginalized people and at-risk people, and who tend to not have access to the opportunities and government services, right? And for as a reminder or refresher for those who weren't listening in on Monday, can you briefly describe your organization? And then we can quickly move the conversation to the responsibilities of certain groups.
For sure. So Ubuntu Mobilizing Central Alberta was created and founded by myself and Sadia Anwar, because we saw a gap in responses and access for people who had difficulty navigating different systems. So, for example, the school system, the justice system, community navigation as a whole, right? We recognize that for some people, area, for others, it was just understanding what to do, how to do it, who to go to. So, for example, someone who migrated here as a refugee, you go through the process and you get a ticket. And most people don't know how to pay a ticket because that's not one of the things that's covered in your settlement or resettlement classes, right? So how do you pay a ticket? How do you pay a fine? If you find yourself before the justice system, how do you navigate? Which lawyer do you call? How do you get a lawyer? So that's what we do. We like to say that we do the unsexy work. So it's basically the work that a lot of other people don't really want to do because there's no glory and fame in it. So that's just a little bit of what we do.
Okay, and thanks very much. And I want to talk about a specific community in the Bahamas, which is the Haitian Bahamian community. I don't necessarily want to talk about Haitian nationals and migrants who've moved here, but I'm talking about their children, those persons who were born in the Bahamas, those persons who were regularized under our laws, and talk about the frustrations that they're going through because they do have barriers, like you mentioned, barriers of knowing what to do, how to apply for, like I said, the justice system, and stuff like that, right? But I also want to speak about the responsibility that community has to the Bahamas. What are the things that they should be doing? Because there is a narrative that Haitian Bahamians tend to take. Just they feel entitled, right?
Yeah.
And I want to have a discussion that perhaps they have some entitlement to certain things, being born in the Bahamas and being regularized, but there's an angst, a disconnect between the two communities, and I want to have a discussion on that. And before I do that, Professor MacArthur, and I forget my Professor MacArthur's last name, and I knew it so well, right? He took issue about the term I used last time, Monday, when I said Bahamians are in waiting. Right, he said there's no such thing, and I remember theorizing that it may not be such thing in law, but in theory there are a group of individuals who are between the ages of 16, 18, 19, 20, 21, who are waiting for citizenship. Right, yeah. They through whatever systems and process of our laws, they have applied. And now are waiting on a response. And if they don't have any criminal record, if they don't have any issues that is counterproductive to the Bahamas, more than likely they shall be granted citizenship. So these are Bahamians in waiting. And I want to read this, right? It's a part of the Constitution. Persons born in the 9th of July, 1973, of non-citizens Bahamians, right? And they have one. A person born in the Bahamas after the 9th of July, 1973, neither of whose parents is a citizen of the Bahamas, shall be entitled, that's a big word when you use shall, upon making application on his attaining the age of 18 years or within 12 months thereafter, is such as manner may be prescribed to be registered as a citizen of the Bahamas. And it just gives them a right to apply. And I'm cool with that, you know, provided that if he is a citizen of some country other than the Bahamas, he shall not be entitled to be registered as a citizen of the Bahamas under this article, unless he renounces his citizenship of that other country, takes the oath of allegiance, and makes the registers such declaration of his intentions concerning residence as may be prescribed. And there's a part 2. Any application for registration under this article shall be subject to such exceptions or qualifications as may be prescribed in the interest of national security or public policy. And it gives details basically on how a person, or like, let me use this word again, Bahamian and waiting are able to apply. And it's a loophole or a caveat said that unless they have some issue with national security or public policy, you know, more than likely, they will be granted citizenship. I just want to put that out there so we can have callers could call in and give commentary on that, and also so you can comment and give commentary on that. But going back to the community, right? The Haitian Bahamian community is considered as vulnerable.
I hate that word. Can I just say
yes,
that?
And mind you, and I'll let you put your word in. I'm not even going to even try to explain what vulnerable is, but I want you to explain what is your opinion on that.
I don't like the word vulnerable when it's used to describe people when their ability is based on what society does to them. So we didn't just come up and become vulnerable, but rather we became vulnerable because of political instability in Haiti, which required our parents to move to the Bahamas. And then upon moving to the Bahamas and going through the process of immigration and migration, you become vulnerable to human traffickers and human smuggling, and you're now vulnerable to being houseless. You're now vulnerable because you don't speak, because English is not your first language. It's not the first language that you start speaking. You're vulnerable because now you may or may not have a job. You may or you may not excel at school. There's the mental health issue. You're vulnerable now because you may not want to go to the hospital if you're sick because someone might ask you for your papers. And so the vulnerability then is centered around the fact of who you are. And so it pushes you in a corner. And that's also where the marginalization comes in, right? Like you're pushed to the margins, to the outskirts of society where you're living, because now anybody can prey on you. And prey, we're not talking P-R-A-Y, but P-R-E-Y, where people, police officers can tell you, you need to give me $500 or I'm taking you to the detention center. When you get to the detention center, someone may say, you need to give me $300 or else I'm deporting you tomorrow as opposed to today, before your family brings your papers. When you're before the courts, if you don't know how to speak English properly, if you don't understand what certain words or phrases are, and you're standing before the courts and not knowing how to navigate that system, you're vulnerable to being thrown in prison simply because you don't have representation, because you don't have access. And so now you're serving 5 years, or you're at Her Majesty, it's no longer Her Majesty's prison, but at Fox Hill, simply because you did not have. And so people have been made to be vulnerable, but we are not vulnerable people. Right. And so I've had to learn that over the years, in not seeing myself as someone for people to pity, but rather to just share with and to connect with and to commune with. We're not asking for anything above what anybody else should get. We're not asking for free land. And I know that's a conversation, that's a whole other conversation. We're not asking for anything that's free. We're simply asking to be treated as human beings, to be allowed to share in community, to be allowed to make ourselves better as well. And so the word vulnerability always strike with me, because we tend to use it towards very specific groups. So Black people, immigrants, queer people, and the likes. And so that's the reason why I don't like that term or that phrase, vulnerable.
And you mentioned that you're not asking for things, or the community, and forgive me for saying you specifically, the community is not asking for things, but we didn't invite you here. And
no,
again, and forgive me for saying you. I'm just for this conversation here, and I don't want to be insulting or disrespectful or anything.
Right.
But my point is, do Bahamians have a duty of care of ensuring that you have access to certain mechanisms in the Bahamas? We did not invite you here. So if you cannot get health care, if you cannot get education, if you cannot get housing, whose problem is that? You can always get up and leave, eh?
Right. And that's where it calls for us to see the human in each other.
That's where the Ubuntu comes in.
That's literally where Ubuntu comes in, right? Because we know where this has come from, even before too, right? Like there are very specific people that we don't think deserve anything better than, or even anything that everybody else has, right? And there's always that, well, we didn't invite you here. If your country sucks, your country sucks. If your country is poor, your country is poor. But we've all sort of like been through that cycle. And the Bahamas prides itself as, we're where our history, right, is always connected to the Eleutherian adventurers who left Bermuda it was Bermuda, because they were being persecuted, right? And were not able to freely practice what they wanted to practice. So they fled Bermuda and ended up where? Eleuthera, and the island of freedom, and started a new life. We always talk about the Loyalists, the American Loyalists who found their way to the Bahamas after the American War of Independence, because they, again, wanted to remain loyal to Britain and did not feel as if they were in a position where they could be their best selves. And so they fled the U.S. to come to the Bahamas. And that's where so much of our American, and we're so proud of that. We pride ourselves on the Eleutherian adventures, and we pride ourselves on the American Loyalists, and we pride ourselves on so many of these other things that have made the Bahamas the great country that it is. And so the same way that we could look at the American Loyalists who were running away from persecution, the Eleutherian adventurers who were trying to make a better home for themselves, and different groups throughout the years, then the same way we can look at the Haitian migrants who are also wanting to do the same.
And I appreciate the history lesson note that is. But Bahamians do not really...
Caveat,
go ahead.
We don't owe it to them. We don't have to give it to them, but put in a process where either you say yes or you say no. But I think for the most part, the Bahamas has wavered to the benefit of many migrants, right? Where we say yes and we say no, but depending on who you are, depending on who you know, depending, then we maybe could say yes a few more times. So it's that gray area where a lot of people say, send all the Haitians them back. But, my maid or my gardener, I applied for him at Hawkins Hill, and I applied for her at Hawkins Hills, and I want these ones to stay because these ones are the good ones. Send the ones we don't like back home. And so it's that gray area where so many people are caught, and then they become vulnerable.
So I have a text here. Great show as usual. Calling a person Haitian Bahamian is one of the most insulting thing you can call a person. You are either Haitian or a Bahamian. Because if you say Haitian Bahamian, that means the person has no identity. And how is important as an identity? And I'll give you an example, right?
It's very important.
Let me make this point first of all. My family has been in this country from 1783, right? I can trace my lineage that far. However, I'm also of immigrant descent because I have a Jamaican lineage. Also, I eat conch salad. I do not eat boiled fish. For breakfast, I would eat ackee and prefer ackee and codfish. Me personally, because I grew up with that, because I had a lineage that pushed that forward first. I am surely a unique Bahamian. And to diminish the point, because I work in tourism also, and they ask, what do you eat at home? And I say, ackee and codfish. And they'd say, how come? Aren't you Bahamian? Yeah, man, it's true Bahamian, but everyone who I know eats ackee and codfish and eat curry goat. My entire community. So surely, with the prefix of Jamaican Bahamian or Bahamian of Jamaican descent, wouldn't that describe me to explain to whoever I'm speaking to identify me as a peculiar or a different Bahamian? Why do I need other people to dictate that I should not prefix who I am? Can I be a unique Bahamian, a Baptist Bahamian, a Anglican Bahamian, or just call me Christian one time?
That's important. And, again, the nuance depends on who you are. Because, and I had to learn that I wasn't always of this mindset, proud to be Haitian, right? Proud to have Haitian heritage. And because for so long you were told that it was dirty, it was ugly, it was poor, it was all of these things. But the more you learn who you truly are, you can only do the favor to yourself and to your ancestors and be proud of that. We're proud of the Greek Bahamians. There's the Greek church in the Bahamas. And we always talk about the influence and the contributions of Greek Bahamians. We are proud of the Chinese Bahamians, right? And they're even in the social studies, because I remember reading about how the Chinese community was able to grow in the Bahamas.
The Chinese don't stop being Chinese. They're still Chinese and Bahamian at the same time, yes.
At the same time, the Greeks were so proud of them and what they have done. And whenever people say, oh, you should identify yourself as Haitian Bahamian or, Bahamian with Haitian heritage or whatever, and I say, okay, that's all fine and cool, but Clay Thompson, right?
Mm-hmm.
Who we saw and everybody was celebrating, myself included, even though I'm a Chicago Bulls fan. When you see that Bahamian flag, you are so proud to see that.
So he's Bahamian of American descent. Or just Bahamian, even though he born in the United States?
He's American of Bahamian descent.
Okay.
Right? Because he's born in the U.S., but dad is Bahamian or something.
And automatically became Bahamian. Go ahead.
You understand what I'm saying? So why should I, if I'm proud, if I make something, if I'm running track and field and I'm running Carifta, but my parents are Haitian, or I'm a Jamaican and my parents are Bahamian, to hold up both flags, to say, this is who I am, to be proud of that heritage and that identity. Because we understood how proud we are when we saw Clay Thompson pulled out that Bahamian flag, right? Like, we know, and he's in the U.S. So if we celebrate that, why can't we celebrate the same at home? Why can't we allow people to find pride in their heritage and their identity?
That does have a caller who wants to engage you. Go ahead, caller. First call for today. Caller, can you hear me?
Hello.
Hello, go ahead.
I'd like to make a comment.
Yeah, man.
Hello to you and your guest.
Pleasure.
I just would like to ask a question. Why is it that persons always go back in history to answer questions of illegal migration and the plight of persons, human under the guise of human rights. We all understand that, right? Because we all, as citizens, wherever we are, could be in that position. But in each country, there are immigration departments and the right way to do things, right? So when you come to someone's country illegally, you cannot expect to be afforded the rights of legal residents and citizens.
Agreed. I have no problem with that. Go ahead.
That's all I'm saying,
But what today we're talking about is Haitian Bahamians of Haitian
is there
descent.
Such a thing, though?
I explained that there is, because I'm a Bahamian of Jamaican descent. Do you eat ackee and codfish?
Person.
Caller?
I love ackee and codfish.
See,
but anyway,
I eat that as a regular thing. Does that make me Bahamian, or does that make me Bahamian of Jamaican descent?
I hear you. I listen to you, but I'm hearing something else.
Okay.
Right? I'm hearing something else, and whenever the question
What
is...
are you hearing?
I'm hearing that, we are all human. Yeah, we are. We are. But we also have a duty as well, right? A duty as well. Because this world would be in chaos. To obey the law and order of a particular country. We are tired of Bahamians. No, you spoke. We are tired of Bahamians of our borders being breached. You know how uncomfortable that is for us as a country? This country is struggling right now. We have a debt, right? We have to, how we afford to pay our debt? By taxpayers' money. That's the poor, the middle class, and the rich, right? We're a sovereign country, right? We're struggling ourselves, and we have always accommodated all. You talk about the Greek and the Chinese, and these people, they go through, for the most part, the immigration process. If they weren't
so
born
do
here.
many Haitians as
if
well.
If they weren't
so
born
do
here.
many Haitians.
Haiti is a country of, 11, 12 million? Are you taking this same plight to the Haitian government?
Absolutely, I do.
Yes,
I am in conversations
and really
with Haitians in
the country of Haiti, because they have a ministry of Haiti, that actually almost like it encourages remittances. Like, our people is they have a ministry that collects these things. You have to work together as a people. Haiti is a beautiful country, I understand. And I understand they have rich, just like every other country, you have your different classes. We have to, as a black people, right, learn to work together, right? Work together and understand that those black nations that, are trying to make it, right? You have to respect the borders, do the right thing.
Absolutely.
Come through the right means, and don't blame Bahamians. If your parents came here illegally, and I know they probably came because they want a better life for their children, but know that you're coming to a country too that have citizens that are living below the poverty line, living in buses, doing all the things that they need to do. While you have other illegals, yes, they're humans, but you must understand we live in a world of law and order.
Thank you very much,
right,
Carla.
so
I appreciate that.
Okay, bye-bye.
So two things that I've always stated is the process. In the Bahamas, and which is what I started with, we have the yes, we have the no, but that gray area is bigger than both, right? So, for example, when you apply, a lot of people don't know this. There are more permit holders in the Bahamas than there are undocumented people in the Bahamas. There's a lot of permanent residents, but the minute your last name is Joseph or Duvalier or whatever, people automatically think you're undocumented, right? So if you are a tax-paying permanent resident of the Bahamas, why shouldn't your child be able to go through the school system? Why shouldn't your child be able to apply for certain things? So people automatically, if you're Haitian, they think you're automatically undocumented, which is not true. There are many people who hold permits. There are permanent residents of the Bahamas. There are people who are citizens of the Bahamas whose last names are still Joseph and Jean and Pierre, who contribute in many different ways to the building of the Bahamas. So my other point to what the caller was saying, so if you're a permit holder, you pay, I believe it was $550 way back then. I'm pretty sure it's higher now. You pay a fee of $550. You get that permit for 1 year. You are supposed, not you, your employer is supposed to deduct national insurance from that.
Okay.
Your employer is supposed to deduct health insurance from that, right? That we know for a fact that many, many, many employers abuse that system. So when these Haitian people, when it's time for them to retire, they're 65, there's no pension for them, and they're permanent residents. There's no pension because their employer never paid in the pension. Their employer never paid in national insurance. Ask how many patients, quote unquote, who are permanent residents, who are citizens, who can claim disability, right? How many of them are able to claim disability? How many of them are able to claim maternity, to go on maternity leave? That doesn't exist within our community. So we contribute in, because a lot of people say, all y'all do is take and take and take, but they don't look at the amount that is also contributed in, as well as these people pay VAT and they pay taxes too.
Let me read this text before you go on, because I want you to comment on that same point, but I want you to consider this also. And I also don't mention that the permit is now $2,000. I heard you say $550. Okay.
It used to be $500 to $550, and now it's like $2,000.
Yes, and caller, I see you. I'm going to let you come in shortly. Morning, CA. I love your show again. Your guest is a prime example of bite the hand that feeds you. The Bahamas fed, school her, and with free health care, and she was able to go off to school, coming back to the Bahamas instead of Haiti to try force us to amend laws to accommodate their agenda for them. All right? I want to know, is that what you're trying to do? You're trying to force the Bahamas to, or
Absolutely
is it something
not.
about checks and balances you're talking about? I want to understand what you're talking about.
Absolutely not. I attended Mabel Walker Primary School. I attended the government high school. And my parents have always reminded us, like all of us, whether I was not born in the Bahamas, but myself and my siblings, about how privileged we were to be raised in the Bahamas. And that's something that we carry with us to this day, which is why my parents still live at home. At home. Still live in the Bahamas. My brother still lives in the Bahamas. My sister's in the States now. But we still call the Bahamas home. The Bahamas is still home. When people talk about biting the hand that feeds you, biting the hand that feeds me is not when I'm saying, hey, this is how we can do things better. Biting the hand that fed me would be if I totally disregarded my education in the Bahamas, where I pretended that I learned everything off my own. And that's totally not what I am doing. To see the bigger picture of it and asking for checks and balances. It's not saying that you're a horrible person. It's just saying, okay, that we should be now at this relationship where we can openly talk about, hey, can we do X, Y, and Z better?
I have another
because
caller.
If you're just, people who are sitting at Her Majesty's prison, their families are asking for better conditions, no matter what their child committed. And that's not saying that they don't recognize the harm that is done, but they're simply saying, let's have this conversation on how to make things better.
Have another caller, Daris. Go ahead, caller, and let's have a conversation.
A pleasant good morning, Mr. Nouri.
Good morning.
And good morning to your guests as well.
Good morning.
I just want to ask your guest if she lives in the Bahamas.
No, she lives in Canada. She operates a non-profit organization that is renowned. It's being heralded as one of the better programs. And I invited her to see if something similar can be incorporated into the Bahamas, where they're promoting marginalized persons to be able to access
something.
Go ahead.
Or illegally.
But I'm not sure how that comes into my conversation about the Bahamas. You're trying to deviate it, though.
We are a country of law.
Go ahead.
Right? Canada is a country of laws, right? She had to go through the process of getting into Canada.
Yes.
Are there illegal Haitians in Canada?
I'm sure.
And
yes, there are.
And if they are found by the Canadian government, what do you think will happen to them?
I'm sure.
They go through a process.
1 minute for me, Daris.
Daris? Yeah, sorry.
I want to keep this conversation about Bahamas of Haitian descent. Not Haitian nationals. I don't want to talk about illegal immigrants. That's a different issue, and we can talk about that a different day. Yeah, we're talking about whether the Bahamas has a duty of care to persons born in the Bahamas of Haitian descent, and whether those persons who born in the Bahamas have responsibility to the country. So when you frame your question, let's talk about those people who born inside the Bahamas, and do we have a responsibility to them, and do they have a responsibility to us? I don't want to talk about the illegal immigrants.
Okay. So we are talking about those persons
Born in the Bahamas,
whose parents have come here illegally.
I'm not sure if illegally or not. Because the Constitution didn't mention the word illegal. So let's stick with the Constitution. And if they did mention the word illegal, I'll bring it up.
Yeah. But you see, my issue is that we have to, those persons who are entitled to, under the law, who are entitled to citizenship should be given those papers to make them regularized citizens of the Bahamas, because we will be creating a problem within a society of people who have no status or whatever. But at some point in time, we have to want to do with persons who are illegal in the country and who are having these so-called anchor babies and just wanting to try to get citizenship. So I think after independence, up to a certain point in time, we have to establish a cutoff date and regularize all of those persons and establish some kind of framework as to what persons who have come here illegally and who are having children, what are we going to do with these particular children?
And I appreciate that question. That's a good question.
So what is done right now is there's no such thing as anchor babies in the Bahamas, because even if you have a child who is born in the Bahamas to Haitian parents, if you look on their I think like birth certificate, it says that their nationality is Haitian.
Yes.
So they are automatically given the nationality of their parents. And what happens with those documented? At any moment, immigration can actually remove them from the country. And we've seen that happen time and time again. So where they will be sent back along with their parents back to Haiti. And upon the age of 18, they can apply to, they can come back to the Bahamas before 18 and apply and go through that process to become Bahamian citizens. So in the Bahamas, there's no such thing as an anchor baby, because just because you have a child in the Bahamas does not entitle the parent in the Bahamas to automatic stay in the Bahamas or to automatic Bahamian citizenship, nor does it entitle that child either. That child has the right to apply, but it's not, you don't have birthright citizenship. The other thing too is that many Haitians are sent back to Haiti along with their children, and their children do come back after the age of 18 to apply.
Let's talk about shantytowns. I know it's an easy subject to talk about, right? But if you are a Bahamian of Haitian descent, using that long term instead of Haitian Bahamian, and you live in a shantytown, you shouldn't be given citizenship. And because to me, you're breaking the law, because a shantytown is against the law.
But here's the thing. In talking, I dislike shantytowns as well. I think one of the things that got me the most, I don't want to say hatred, but the most vile of comments was when I wrote a few years ago about that very subject, where I was very frank and very open that the Haitian community, that shantytown should not exist. And I should not want anyone to live in a shantytown in the Bahamas. Anyone, regardless of who you are, nobody should live in those subhumane conditions where you have no running water, there's no electricity, there's no school nearby. If there's a fire and it affects one house, instead of just affecting that house, like 10 homes will be affected, and so many people will lose their lives and harm is caused. And so I am a very, very, very strong proponent of the demolition of informal settlements or shantytowns. However, here's the thing. So people say, if you're a citizen, if you're applying to become a citizen and you're living in shantytowns, that you shouldn't be given citizenship. However, if you were born and raised with your parents, and your Haitian parents who hold work permits, or your Haitian parents who hold permanent residency, they cannot go to the bank and get a loan or get a mortgage, or they cannot put a down payment like everybody else or anyone else, right, to apply for proper housing. If there are housing discrimination that we know, right? You were born and raised with your parents. What do we expect of these people then? You can't just expect them to pick up the day that they turn 18 to go and find housing in the inner city, or housing where in Bacardi that's outside of the shanty town. That's a process. And you cannot own, you can't, it's very difficult for them to own homes before they become citizens. And this has always gotten me. On the permanent residency form, it asks if you are a homeowner in the Bahamas, but you have to have permanent residency in order to purchase home in the Bahamas. So it's like a catch 2020, and I'm not sure how they understand that. So these are not expats who has $50,000 and $60,000 just sitting in the bank that can purchase a property and build on there, because people will not give building permits to them, right? So we want them to have homes. We want them to have proper homes, indoor homes, but then there's discrimination, housing discrimination. People don't want to rent to them, and there's a lack of housing as well. So it's what do we want them to do and what they should do. That's also an issue. But the shanty town should be a no, and I've been very vocal in opposing any Haitian group that goes to the courts to demand that these people remain in those conditions. I spoke about it before Hurricane Dorian. I spoke about it after Hurricane Dorian, that there's no way that there should be any organization, any groups of people, lawyers, or whoever have you, who are fighting for Haitians to remain in those shanty towns, because it's not safe for them.
That is
health-wise.
That is, I have another call, but before I go to the caller, and I know you already hinted towards it and said the answer already, but briefly, so I go straight to the caller. Why do shantytown exist, you think?
So shantytowns exist, and if you look at where they are, they're usually close to the farm, to the farms. So the agricultural settlements, right? So if you look at Abaco and you look at Eleuthera, those were people who were brought in to work specifically on some of those farms that's nearby, right? It was easy housing. The employers, the second part to that is the employers were not upholding their part of the agreement with the Department of Immigration to provide housing for the people that they're employing, right? And then the third part is, of course, housing discrimination, where people, if you go and try to rent a house and you're Haitian, they may not want to rent to you, right? And so when you have those three things, so lack of access, and you have employers who are taking advantage of people and not upholding their part of the agreement to the Department of Immigration, that's where shanty towns come from. And the same people who are complaining about people who live in the shanty towns are the same ones, one, who employ people who live in the shanty towns, and two, they are also the people who live in the shanty towns. So it's a very complex situation there.
We definitely see that happening in Abaco, but we're going straight to the caller now. Go ahead, caller. Thank you for holding, and let's have a conversation.
Yes, good morning, Mr. Nuri.
Go ahead, man. Nice to hear you.
Good morning to you, young lady.
Good morning.
The thing is, Mr. Nuri, I like to make an input from a Bahamian perspective, and so I agree with some of the texters, right? And so the young lady, she didn't say morning. I don't know why, but the thing is...
I did.
Yeah, but we must realize, concerning the word vulnerability, we are vulnerable to being overwhelmed by Haitian migration, all right? Now, it might sound foolish, but that's what I see, because I live in the inner city. I have many Haitian Bahamian friends, had Haitian American girlfriend, etc. And so even in America, I see on the news they have a Haitian, I don't know if this lady know a Haitian American famous historian named West Natalie Alcenat. Very intelligent young man, right? So I'm looking at Haiti, but you all have, about 11 point something million people, right? So when we look at the constructs of the cooperation between France and the United States, which contributed to the dysfunction of Haiti politically and verbally, because the narratives they put on the news from the time of the revolution, and they blame the Haitian Revolution for reverberating all the way to the stage back in history. So what I'm saying is, no one, even with Aristide, right, he blames France for kidnapping him, so to speak, all right? And so he was, remember now, Aristide was pushing he was pushing avidly for France to repay Haiti, all right? Because Haiti had to pay France for not only damaging white people, plantations, etc., but for lost slaves also. And so the fact that he people not concentrating their efforts where they should, right? And the fact that they're not bearing in mind in the biosecurity hazardous paradigm that they've created, there are certain diseases endemic to Haiti. So we would prefer people come on the plane. You know, I don't have I'm not a homophobic or nothing like that. But what I'm saying is they're not looking at the repercussions of people bringing diseases also, not just drugs and guns. But it is what it is. So this is from my perspective, with a population of 11.something million. Come on, man. How could you still let all these people left? Like the lady said, they want to bite the hands that feed them, but they're not concentrating on America and France that have them in this condition and still perpetuating it against them. Because America occupied Haiti from 1915 to 1934, and they didn't have any good intentions. And so even with the split in 1844, you see the islands, one side is much better off than the next. So common sense can tell you it's a European construct. So maybe you guys should concentrate on France and America, you know, instead of trying to drain this little country. I mean, even with the Shantytowns, man, come on. That is creating a schism between the people. You saw the documentary last night. That is hurtful, you know. People coming in illegally and squatting on the land. And as far as I'm concerned, it's supposed to be 30 years for you to occupy a land. I don't know where the legality is. I read 30 years before you are allowed to own a land. So if you how can you document that you were squatting for 30 years? How could you document that? Have a good day, man.
Thank you very much. Dadis. No, I don't want you to necessarily answer that. I want you to answer this. Should Haitian Bahamians, should Haitian Bahamians be preoccupied in changing things that's happening in Haiti and agitating for America and France to change the status quo? Or should they be concentrating on where they live now? And we're going to have you answer that on return off after the break. This is Guardian Radio in the AM. This is C.A. Nuri, and I'm interviewing Duelita Datas, who is a community organizer in Alberta, Canada. And we're just talking about issues in the Haitian Bahamian communities in the Bahamas. We'll be right back.
J.S. Johnson Insurance agents are the best. Reliable service, we've been on the scene, protecting since 1919. J.S. Johnson Insurance has the test. You're always covered me. J.S. Johnson Insurance, peace of mind.
The new Guardian Radio app is here. Listen live to all our Guardian Radio shows and live video stream select programs in our studio. Get information about Guardian Radio. Send messages, including text, email, and even call. All from our amazing new Guardian Radio app. Download it free today in your App Store for your Apple device or Play Store for your Android device. The all-new and improved Guardian Radio app.
And welcome back to Guardian Radio. Before the break, we was asking that is the responsibility of Haitian Bahamians, and should they be the cry in the wilderness lobbying in the United States? Should they be going to France and lobbying? Should these Bahamians of Haitian descent be lobbying, having a better life here? So, and that's what the question I want to ask. So what should they be doing? Dadis, are you there?
Yeah, so I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Go ahead.
Okay, so I think, one, we can walk and chew gum at the same time. So, and the question about the reparations in France, what the U.S. has done, the occupation of Haiti, to this day, and the United Nations, the harm that the United Nations have caused to Haiti. I don't think people realize this, but there has been United Nations boots on the ground, foreign boots on the ground in Haiti since 1994, on and off. 1994. It's a sovereign state, but there has been foreign occupiers since 1994. So again, we can walk and chew gum at the same time. So we can ask, and a lot of people are like, oh, you lobbying and you advocating for this. I'm not, in the sense that I'm just saying we need to have a conversation, right, to see how we can coexist together, because Haitian Bahamians do live in the Bahamas.
Is there a need for Haitian and Bahamians to coexist?
I don't know. But I know that we're so interconnected that if we were to try to divide the two, to say, okay, you're Haitian and you're Bahamian, that I think some of us will be surprised as to who gets to go and who gets to stay. And I say that with the utmost frankness. What the gentleman was saying is we should be concentrating ourselves to the U.S. and to France. That's perfect. And to concentrate ourselves to Haiti, that is all fine and good. But when you are born in the Bahamas or when you've been raised in the Bahamas, you're not going to go to the U.S. and start demanding things until you get sorted out at home. So for right now, what I'm thinking one of the first steps to do would be to ensure that we're regularized, that people have access to housing, that people are able to have the basic needs met, while at the same time calling on France to pay back the reparations like twice, because the reparations that we paid to them was for the harm that they did to us. So they need to pay that back twice. And then we need to hold the government, different governments accountable for the harm that they've perpetuated against Haiti from 1804 to the present. But at the same time, we have to talk about things that are closer to home. I've never advocated for undocumented migrants to just show up in the Bahamas. I've never advocated for that.
But when we talk about Haitian Bahamians, you're going back to the Haitian narrative again. Should Haitian Bahamians lobby to have a better quality of life in the Bahamas?
I don't like the word lobby, because with
so they shouldn't ask for it at all?
No,
or what word should you use?
No. Here's why I say lobby, because when you talk about lobbyists are paid. So lobbyists are paid people with a certain political agenda, right? And so those are who are lobbyists. If you're advocating, that's advocacy. Does not have any political agenda. It doesn't have any specific religious agenda. It doesn't have an agenda other than the fact that they want people to have access. Now, I do believe that there are a lot of lobbyists who are working within the Haitian community who do not have the Haitian community's best interests at heart. They're there to kick up political dust. They're there to score political points, and they're using Haitians as pawns in their games. And they only show up when there's controversial issues, and they're parading Haitians before the courts, and they're parading Haitians in front of national television, not for the betterment of these people, not to tell these people what's best for them, but rather to say, this is a political score that I wanted to settle years ago, and now this is my opportunity, because the Shantytown is a perfect example of that. No one... I don't see any groups advocating for Haitians to actually get to know what they can do for themselves. I don't see anyone advocating with the Haitian government, with Haitians, to do better. I don't see any accountability of being called on the Haitian government on these groups. I don't see them calling the abuses that Haitians are perpetuating on each other to be held accountable, right? So no one is holding some of the upper echelons of the community accountable, but they're parading before the courts and before the TV and saying, this is what we want, this is what we want. And it's not necessarily what's best for the Haitian community in the Bahamas.
Give me your top two things that Haitian Bahamians should be doing right now instead of Bahamas.
One of the top two things that they should be doing is ensuring that they are living in humane conditions where possible and as much as possible. Come up with a 3-year plan to move out of the shanty towns. And even if you're not in the shanty towns, there's a lot of informal settlements within the inner city, right? So if you don't have indoor plumbing, if there's no electricity, if wires are running through, get that together. The second thing is to make sure that your papers are together, whether it's Bahamian papers or Haitian papers, because there are a lot of people who don't give, their parents pass away and they don't have death certificates. They don't hold their records from school. They don't hold their report cards to show anything. To make sure that they can keep their records up to date, that tell their children where they're from in Haiti. So in case they have to go back to Haiti and claim land in Haiti, or if they have to go back to Haiti and find death certificates, marriage certificates, divorce certificates.
And Datus, we are out of time, Datus, and I appreciate you greatly, and I need to invite you again. But this has been Guardian Radio AM and Cecil Nuri, and we'll see you the next time.